So I am back with another recap of Magician Season 5. We are now on episode 4. And so I was watching, kind of taking notes just to see. And the big theme for this episode is choices. Now, one of the things that I find very interesting about the magicians and their universe, and also how, you know, the main characters are all painted as like they're constantly saving the world. They're constantly being put in a position where they have to, you know, keep humanity going. Whether they're gods trying to just like destroy Earth to start over, whether they're trying to destroy Earth because it was an experiment and this Earth didn't go so well, but they have another Earth, like whatever it is, or, you know, there was one season, I can't remember the actual season, when Alice was a Niffin. They were trying to get her back, but also they needed to save the world. Like they're constantly being called to save the world. However, and so they do tend to, it has kind of that hero that can be seen as somewhat self-righteous hero vibe at times, where it's like, oh, we have to save the world, and we have to do the right thing, and it's what's best, and it's for the world, and so sometimes when you're watching shows that have kind of that hero thing, it can be a bit much to kind of constantly hear people talking about, I sacrifice myself to do the right thing. And while that happens in this episode, one of the things I do appreciate is watching really what happened with Julia and Penny, where, earlier in the season, he had to choose between whether, really from last season to this season, when Julia was basically dying, because she had been, to try to get the god out of her, and he had to decide between whether she would stay a god or a goddess, or if she became human, so essentially kind of losing all of her power that she had gotten as a goddess, and he chose for her to stay human. So it's interesting how in this episode, the roles are reversed, and Julia has to decide between, saving the world and having the goddess the goddess of melody, who shows up and is like, do this thing for me, and give me the book. She wants the binder, and she's like, give me the binder and I will perform a miracle. And of course, Julia has to choose between whether the miracle is saving the world from the convergence or saving Penny's life, because Penny is dying. And so why is Penny dying? Talk about that in a second, but I found it very interesting how she chose to save Penny. And so there's always moments in the seasons where the characters make a very wholly selfish decision, like, saving Penny versus saving the world is super, like, she's saving her boyfriend. And so it's very interesting sometimes when they do that, because that helps. For me, it helps kind of balance out I gotta do the right thing for the sake of the right thing and saving everyone, which is essentially what Katie does in this episode. She, she is a recovering addict, or I don't know, I guess the correct correct language they tend to say, you're always an addict. And so she's been clean or been sober. Say clean. She's been sober. I'm trying to make sure I use the proper language, for I guess over a year. And she goes from, regular hedge witch Katie that kind of has these things that she's pulled into, or sometimes it happen with the magicians, and she, they have these stressful situations, but she is kind of a part of a team of people, so it's not just all on her, to being essentially the head of the hedge witches, where she is now in leadership, and she has to make the decisions about what happens and what's for the greater good, and I have to think about everyone. I can't just think about my own thing. So that is where Katie is, and she's had kind of this, shift, and if you've ever been in a situation where you went from being a part of the team to managing the team, that just the stress, the extra responsibility can be heavy. And so we see her at at, I guess, an NA, Narcotics Anonymous meeting, basically checking in and like, I am having this really crazy situation, this very outlandish, it's very challenging. I won't even say crazy or outlandish. It's a very challenging situation. I have to make all of these decisions and it's hard, and I want to do drugs because that's easier. And that's kind of what she says, it would be easier to just be high versus having to deal with all of this. And even in that, she then still has to decide, well, now I still might have to be high because I have to actually take acid, which is RCH, which I guess is like a chemical compound for acid, to do the thing, to basically, because I'm a leader, I have to do this because I have to solve this because I'm in leadership. And it's very interesting to watch her being like, oh, this is a quandary, I am, for my own self-preservation, it's better for me not to do acid because I'm an addict versus I have to do the thing for the greater good. So she decides to do the thing for the greater good, but in the moment, she actually, at the NA meeting, she runs across Dean Fogg, so they're doing it together. So it's an interesting seeing them too, because he clearly, she was a hedge witch, so she was, Break Bills and Dean Fogg and all of them are not, they don't like the hedge witches because the hedge witches, they don't get their magic through sanctions. But Dean Fogg shows up and is like, because the hedge witches came through with the power source that they needed, and so he shows up and is a part of her journey. But even still, in like the direct opposition of Julia basically saying, forget about the world, I want to save my boyfriend, she does the exact opposite. My sobriety is important to me only, whereas helping all of the head witches is it's a greater good situation. So we still have that, that hero, I have to do what's best for everyone thing, but I always find it refreshing, if anything, when I see characters that do things that are just like, okay, this is for solely selfish reasons. In this particular instance, it's a balance. It's a good balance, I think, or it's an interesting, or it's I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a balance. And so it gives you, an insight into what they care about and what they're willing to do or what they're willing to sacrifice or not. And it's always based on, some major hard choice. And so that's when I wrote down the theme. I was like, oh, it's about choices. So I just talked about Julia and Katie and kind of what they are going through in this episode and their major choices. And I see theirs as kind of a mirror to each other where, they kind of do the reverse. But then we have Alice with the librarian, whose name I just completely drew a blank on. She chooses to, the head librarian chooses to burn the books versus giving them over to the Visigoths. But with Alice, she wouldn't leave her to her death. Because she had decided, I will die. You should go, Alice, because you have a greater situation. It's not my time. I'm prepared to say goodbye. And Alice was like, nah, I'm gonna make you. So even in that moment, they kind of had that they were each other's mirrors, because Alice decided, like, I am just gonna take you, I'm staying here with you. I'm not leaving you. And the librarian decided, rather than to stay there and I guess try to fight the Visigoths and possibly die, it seemed very likely she would die, she decides to burn down all of the books of knowledge. But of course, as we learn, she has read. She's been the librarian for quite some time. So she's been in there reading the books. So they come back together. So it's like you have these two kind of really big choices that are made, much on a larger scale with Katie and Julia and their choices, but then you have Alice and the head librarian, whose name I am completely forgetting. Julia. She makes, they make their decisions in tandem. And so it's interesting watching kind of the choices happening. I think something is going to, so I didn't mention Margot and Elliot. So they are in this episode, as with many episodes, it tends to be they're in twos or threes. Very, very rarely are they all together at once. So in this instance, we start off with Katie and Dean Fogg. We have Alice and the librarian. So they're kind of separate. They're not with other main characters, other parts of the squad, for lack of a better term. And then you have Julia and Penny that were kind of together, then separate, then back together. And then Margot and Elliot are in Fillory. And so we are seeing, you know, Margot they're investigating the Dark King. And in that, and so I was thinking, oh, okay, so this is really just going to be about kind of learning, moving the plot along and learning more about the story. But in that, we see an interesting, Margot has to make a choice where she, you know, what season was that? It might have been season 2 or 3. Season 2 or 3, I remember, if I'm recalling, when Margot lost an eye and got an angel eye. So, you know, now she can see the angels, and they see an angel, they come across an angel in a house. Margot sees the angel, and the angel is kind of like pleading with her face, like, please don't do whatever negative thing they're going to do to me. But Margot has to maintain her current station because, you know, they're trying to take back the kingdom. And so she has to lock up the angel. I'm checking notes here to make sure I am the fairy. No, wait, was it the fairy? Yes, the fairy. Sorry, I'm calling it an angel, and it was a fairy. So she sees the fairy. So, you know, we see her make it's a choice. It's a much it's a longer term choice. Like, this feels like a small choice that's going to lead up to a bunch of other choices. But what I see, so the situation with Elliot and Margot and Fillory, that kind of was a small, you know, there were some small shifts in that story, but I definitely see that I think something's going to happen with the Dark King. So I'm interested to see what happens as we keep going with Elliot, because they seem to have like chemistry and energy, which, you know, it could be an attraction. It could be something else. Like, you know, when you meet people and you have chemistry with them, it's like, are you guys supposed to date? Is this date chemistry? Is this, we're just going to be really good friends chemistry? Like, what is it? So in this instance, they're definitely giving us potential romantic vibes, but so far it's been, nothing romantic has happened. So, but I think though, what we're starting to see is Elliot and the Dark King are starting to develop some type of a bond and connection, which I think is going to be problematic down the line. Now Margot is clear that they seem to like each other. She, you know, but she's still like, from the stories that Finn and Alex, I'm killing the names right now, that Finn and Josh told about him and the things that he did, they're like, something about him, he ain't the best person. Like, is this benevolent thing? Is this like a real thing, or is he putting on and actually really a terror? And so Margot and Elliot are kind of experiencing him from two different perspectives. So it'd be interesting to see what happens in future episodes, because something is going on with him and Elliot, and I think it's going to cause a hitch. But we kind of close out. So I made some notes, predictions, and I'm curious to see if they come true. So Penny is dealing with his issues with traveling, and kind of like suddenly traveling and with hearing a signal. We do find out at the end that that the lady is, oh no, her name's not Julia. Her name was Zelda. Sorry, the librarian is Zelda. I'm forgetting names. I have some notes here, but we see with Penny and his traveling, that he's picking up a signal, and Clarion, we find out, who comes to Penny, is like, are you hearing the signal? And kind of sends him on this whole thing where he's like traveling unintentionally. And then she tells and then, you know, what happens with Julia and the god of music, and she chooses Penny, but Penny loses his ability to time travel. No, he loses his ability to his psychic abilities, but he can still time travel. But as he says, that's dangerous, because now he can't really know where he's going. Like, he doesn't have that extra sense. So he can travel, but it'll be like traveling blind. But Clarion is there, and Clarion sees, you know, she's like, I see this happening, it's terrible, you don't have your psychic ability anymore, I feel so bad. And she reveals that she is Plum married Chatwin. So she is related to the Chatwins of Fillory, of the book about Fillory. And what was his name? I'm drawing a complete blank on the guy's name, the Chatwin guy who wrote the book and then turned out to be kind of a terrible person. But she is related. And so, but then she like goes away. She blips out because she also is a traveler. So I made a note though, before she made her kind of declaration of apology and reveal, I made a note about if the signal is related to the convergence that Penny was picking up, and if that's maybe telling them that it's coming, and now that he's no longer has a psychic ability, will that be another issue? And if Plum Plum, who was Clarion, Plum aka Clarion, will have to come back and help, or if she will, because anytime they've had experiences with the Chatwins, it's always been very loose. Like you never know what's gonna happen because the Chatwins kind of do what they do. So that happened, and so I made a note if that. So I'm interested to see if the signal has anything to do with the convergence. I feel like it might. It makes sense. However, this is also the magician, so sometimes things are not as directly connected as they seem. So we'll see. But I also asked the question if the library was truly gone. So yes, I know that Zelda, not Julia, Zelda, I was trying to find her name, I found it, who was the head librarian, burned it down. But did she? I mean, you know, she's never shown herself to be, even if she makes choices, there's always more to her story, So I'm curious to see what will happen there. But this was a pretty cool episode. It was a nice, you know, way to kind of move the plot along, to get us closer to the convergence, but also kind of bring in more characters, bring up other potential elements that might have to come into play when they're trying to deal with the convergence. Oh, and at the end, what happens, Zelda is like, well, I've read up on the convergence because she's been the librarian, so now we'll come back to Zelda. So I'm definitely hopping around here, but stay with me. And then Zelda's like, the way that you can stop the convergence, like it's not impossible, it's simple, but it's not, you know, it's not challenged. She was like, it's not completely impossible, but it's very simple. And so of course they have to do something that's very monumental and kind of fantastical, which is one of the cool things about the show. And they have to move the moon in order to stop the convergence. So, but the thing that always happens is no one ever asks, okay, we stopped the convergence and then what? Like the convergence was happening for a reason. Are we addressing the reason, or are we just addressing the outcome of that reason? And so this is often what kind of comes back to bite them when they're trying to save the earth or solve the thing. They never they never take a step further or dig deeper into what may be happening. So I think that we're going to see something come out of this. And so it'll be interesting to see how we go with the convergence. But that is, I mean, we're only on episode 4, so we still have a few episodes to go, so we can, and you know, we still haven't had our all music episode, which those are always fun. So we'll have to, or you know what, no, that was last season. So we'll have to see what goes. So what are your thoughts about episode 4? Are you rewatching it with me, or are you rewatching it and want to chat about it because you might have noticed some things? So this is my first watch, and The Magicians is one of those multi-layered shows where there's like always a bunch of stuff going on. So if you've watched it more than once and picked up on things that I might be missing because this is my first watch, yeah, let's talk below, because I'm curious, because there's always so many different layers in the plots and so many different things happening under things that it would be cool to kind of get that perspective. So I look forward to chatting with you there. I'll be back for episode 5 of season 5, but this is my recap of episode 4, season 4 of The Magicians. It's called Making Magic. Let me just confirm, because I have been, titles today are just not great with me. It's called Magicians Anonymous. So we'll see what happens in episode 5, but if you have some thoughts about episode 4, if you've watched it more than once and you're picking up on some nuances that I didn't see, let's talk about them in the comments below. Until then, we'll be back to chat more about this really cool show.